What's up, Pitt fans? Welcome back to another Pitt mailbag here on the Post-Gazette Sports Now YouTube channel. He is Chris Carter. I am Noah Hiles. We are your Pitt beat reporters for the PG, and as always, we're back to answer some questions. Chris, a very, very exciting week that just went by with Pitt basketball. 2 huge wins for the Panthers, and we're actually going to start off there with the most recent of that pair of victories. Jerry wants to know, is this Jerry Dulac? Send any questions here? No, it's not. Jerry wants to know, was Saturday's win over Miami the best Jeff Capel has had in his 5 seasons at Pitt? I'll let you start off.
It's tough because wins can often be like they can mean different things at the end of a season with how your season, because there's been some big wins that they've had over his 5 years. I think Virginia this year is still a very important win, but I think that this could be the win that flips Pitt into being the team that they can be this year. Because if they lost that game to Wake Forest, I think that would have been a potential momentum swing on the season. But to win that game in the fashion that they did with the clutch game that they had, and then to win another clutch game against a good ACC opponent, a ranked ACC opponent, I think it has the potential to be the thing that sets them up and be like, oh no, we are for real. We're going to be pressing forward. I think that Pitt has a very good chance. So I'll say that Virginia, I think, still ranks because they're still ranked in the top 10 right now. And we'll see how that plays out for the rest of the year. But momentum wise, it might become the most important win if they're able to kind of get on a run here in this last stretch of the season.
I think it is his best win, simply because I think it adds to the validity of the wins over North Carolina and Virginia. Just saying, hey, they didn't just have one little stretch. This team's able to come back down double digits against a ranked opponent in the second half and win. That's the 3rd time this team's done it this year. And granted, all 3 times have been home games. Pitt has yet to play a ranked team on the road. And it's 3-0 this year against ranked opponents. I think after that close win against Wake Forest, that kind of preserves Pitt's bubble status. But this win over Miami gets them out of the last 4 in conversation, I think. And we've seen that a little bit through bracketology. And, I said that Pitt moving forward after the Florida State loss would need, 2, 3, 4 big wins, notable wins. That Miami one is a second win in a row. We said they needed to go 2-1 in their next 3 games. They got those 2 wins right there. So it takes pressure off of having to go into North Carolina and get a win against a red-hot Tar Heel team in the Dean Dome looking for revenge. And like you said, Chris, just the fashion that it came in, an 11-0 run to end it, holding Miami scoreless for the final 2 minutes and 11 seconds of regulation, I believe. Just very impressive stuff. And it's also the most important win for things that have nothing to do with the team on the floor. That was the first sellout since 2019. You had the 2003 Big East tournament champions in attendance. If you lose that game, it's a morale killer. That would have been Pitt's 3rd straight home loss on a Saturday. You need to win when the weekend crowd's there. When the people show up, you can't just continually disappoint them. The Clemson loss was one thing, and then the Florida State loss. If they lose again to Miami, people are going to say, you know what? We're just going to watch on TV then. Because that was the biggest home game remaining on the schedule. Maybe Syracuse down the line will be an exciting one, but this was the last one to really, really get excited for. The fans showed up, and they have a reason to come back now after that victory. That's why I think it's his biggest. But I will say this. If Pitt makes the tournament, that's not going to be the biggest win in Jeff Capel's tenure here, because they're going to have to continue winning big games moving forward. They have less pressure on them than they would have if they lost that one, but they're going to need to keep rattling off impressive wins because job's not done, in the words of Kobe Bryant.
15-7, 9 ACC games to go, I believe, correct?
Yeah, nine regular season games remaining, and then the ACC tournament. So Avi wants to know, will Coach Capel get an extension, and for how long? I don't know what next year will be like, but hopefully we get more size next season. Did Hughley get his red shirt? That's 2 questions in a statement, but we will. I don't know about the Hughley thing. We won't find out anything about that, I think, until the end of the season. As far as the extension goes, I'd have to imagine he would get something if they make the NCAA tournament. Just based upon, how much pressure was on him this season, how this team has come together and played, the way that it's won, I think is worthy of showing I think it shows that someone's really building something here. Just the unity he's been able to construct with a group of kind of newcomers, and the future looks bright. And we're going to talk about that later with other questions, but Pitt has some solid recruits coming in next year, and you're getting arguably the two best players on this year's team who haven't played hardly at all. One of them hasn't played at all, but the top two guys that were supposed to be on this year's team have had little to no impact on this team's success this season. So theoretically, this should be a better team next year. I think for all of those reasons listed, if Pitt makes a tournament, Capel is going to get an extension. Chris, anything to add?
Yeah, I think a big thing there too. I tweeted this out, but during the intros of the game where they beat Miami, Dior Johnson was the player who was doing all the handshakes with the guys coming off the bench. He looks very involved with this program, Noah. And if Dior Johnson was going to bail, I think he would just be kind of just going through the motions, just being like, you know what, y'all good luck this year. I'll go to my next team and try to ball there. But it looks like he's sticking around, and it looks like the team is taking to him. Because that's the other thing. It's like the guy. It was Blake Hinson was doing it. Like they had their own thing. Jamarius had their like Nelly had. All of them seem to have a connection with him. And Jamarius Burton told us that they voted as a team about him being allowed back in the locker room after his situation with the charges that he pleaded guilty to. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, because if you're Pitt right now, you're looking at this upcoming class. You got Jalen Lowe, who's going to add to your guard play. I think a lot of people are looking at that as far as what Pitt's going to be losing with all the guards. The Nelly Cummings, Jamarius Burton, and Greg Elliott all will be gone after this season. But you're getting Jalen Lowe, you're getting Carlton Carrington, Lowe, a 4-star kid who's getting a lot of talk, and then you get Dior Johnson back. I think that is big. Marlon Burns is more of like a small forward that's going to fit in there. We'll see how he plays, but I do think it'll be interesting if Fetty sticks around and the Twins stick around and Hughley comes back and he's healthy. Man, like that's a heck of a front court that you can work there, and you can find a balance there. It'll probably take some time with those younger guys, but I do think that you're seeing some building there, and because of that, if they finish strong this year, like you said, I think he's going to, and he maybe should get an extension, because there's been a lot of criticism about Capel and a lot of blame heaped on him, but each step of the way, I was like, man, like he inherited one of a really bad situation. Like you'd have to go back to things that Kevin Stallings, did. He inherited a decent roster that had guys on it that there was something in the program for. There was nobody on that roster when he was done with it, when he handed it to Capel, that was even close to being an NBA guy. And that hadn't happened to a Pitt team since like the early 80s, I think, when I looked back through that. So he not only inherited that situation and had to completely change the culture. Like if you talk to players who went through that time, they sat in lounge chairs while they watched film. They were, talked to in a different way. They weren't pushed to work more, things like that. There were a lot of culture things he had to reset, and then he had to go recruit and basically get his recruits like Xavier Johnson and those guys to become leaders without leaders to show them the way. He's now had that full reset. If they finish strong this year, John Rothstein pointed out that he should be an ACC Coach of the Year candidate. And if you have a guy like that, you keep him around.
Yeah, I agree. Again, before we go handing out extensions, let's see how this finishes. There's still 9 games in the regular season. There's an ACC tournament. There's a possibly NCAA tournament or an NIT or a CBI, whatever. But let's just see how it plays out. Capel also has like 3 or 4 years still on his current deal, so there's time for an extension. So Dave wants to know, how do you think Capel will fill out the roster next year if all scholarship players that are eligible return, plus the 3 recruits already signed? So if everyone comes back aside from Nelly, JB, and Greg Elliott, those are the 3 players on the roster with no eligibility remaining. I believe Nike still has 1 year. How does the roster look? And I think it's pretty
It's
Pretty
set.
simple. Yeah. I mean, like, if everyone returns, you have 3 open. Well, I also think that Pitt is Division I, you get 13 scholarships. Pitt's only using 12 right now.
Right.
If I'm correct. And then you have Jeffress, who's out right now, Dior, who's redshirting, and Hughley, who's out right now. So Pitt's only playing now with 9 scholarship guys. But you assume all 3 come back based on this hypothetical that Dave gave us. You just sub out Nelly, Jamarius, and Greg Elliott with Carlton Carrington, Marlon Barnes, and Jalen Barnes. And that's your roster. And you even have an extra spot to bring in someone through the transfer portal, be it a JUCO guy, another Power 5 player, whoever. That's really how it looks, I think. And then, you can make corresponding moves if anyone else leaves through the portal, but I don't know. I mean, maybe Nike just calls it a career and goes plays overseas, even though he has a year of eligibility left. I think he has a year of eligibility left. I don't see Blake Hinson going to the NBA, and I don't see anyone really disgruntled coming off the bench right now. So I think next year's roster, as it stands right now, is pretty cut and dry.
Yeah, I mean, there's always surprises with the portal. There's guys that sometimes dip that you're not expecting. But Pitt's had that sometimes, but a lot of times it's been guys like you said they weren't seeing time. Like Dan Oladapo was a guy, or just guy like Koulibaly when he was here, even though he was seeing time. But maybe I know William Jeffress is going through an injury right now. Maybe him, because he might feel like he's not, there's not as much of a place for him. But it's hard to see the Twins going with how much time they're both getting. And how much they seem to really enjoy the program. It's hard to see Fetty going with how much time he's gotten.
Maybe Nate Santos.
Maybe, and Nate's the one I think that could make sense. But I also think Nate's getting decent minutes. For what he's been able to bring, and I think he's growing. I think one thing that Jeff has done is, at least throughout the season this year, this appears like a team that loves to play together and loves to be together, and it's looking good because they're winning games. If they were losing games, this would probably sound a lot different. So I think it'd be very interesting to see how much of that carries over into an offseason when all these kids start getting a chance to make decisions for themselves and be like, what if someone offers me this? Or what if this is better over here? What if I have a chance to start and be a star on this team over there? That all those things are going to be considered. But as they're constructed right now, if they don't lose anybody, they got their 3 kids they're bringing in that have already signed. I think they'll be in a good place. Maybe they have to go in the transfer portal, but I think the success of how they've hit this year in the transfer portal, after Heather said they added 2 staffers to the program that were specifically dedicated to studying the transfer portal and getting the best out of it. This is the first year of results of that. I think that if any of that happens, there should be confidence that Pitt could find 1 or 2 more players to fill in there.
Right. If you want to give Jeff Capel and his staff a couple of extra spots to fill for the transfer portal, let them cook. I mean, they did pretty well with the guys that they brought in, not only this past offseason, but you look at Burton and Nike Sabande were also transfers to Pitt. Neither of them started their collegiate careers here as well. So pretty much every player that gets minutes for the Panthers this year, aside from the Twins, came here via transfer one time or another.
Mm-hmm.
Or Nate Santos, excuse me. We'll move forward now. Willis wants to know, what record does Pitt need to finish with down the stretch that will guarantee them a spot in the dance, regardless of how it does in the ACC tournament? This is a good question, Willis. I know what you're talking about. I don't need to question you on that. You like that, Chris? No? All right.
I don't have a Yoshi hammer. I wish I would have had I wish there was a meme that I could just play right now. That was terrible.
Right now, Pitt is 15-7 overall and 8-3, excuse me, in the ACC. One of those 2 records is obviously a lot more aesthetically pleasing than the other. It's the 8-3 in the ACC is what has Pitt as a tournament team right now, because in its non-conference, there were a couple good wins. There was the Northwestern win that I think was good, and really, that's actually probably it as far as the non-conference slate, because they didn't really beat anyone else that impressive. But there's enough games and Pitt's done well enough that I think if it goes 7-2 for the rest of the year and it's 9 games, I think that if it can afford an upset in the first round of the ACC tournament. Because if it goes 7-2 in these next 9 games, Pitt will finish the regular season 22-9 and 15-5 in the ACC. That means Pitt's going to get one of the top 4 seeds, I'd have to imagine, in the conference tournament, which means that, if it's losing in its first ACC tournament game, it's going to be losing to a Wake Forest or another bubble team, a Virginia Tech, a Syracuse,
right,
as opposed to losing to a Georgia Tech or a Louisville or a Florida State or a Notre Dame. That would look really bad. It wouldn't add another quad 4 loss to its resume more than likely. So I think a 22-9 record, I think all but seals the deal. It might make things still might be a little nerve-wracking. 22-9 plus a first-round ACC exit might get them to Dayton. But I think that, because even if you look at it where if those 2 losses come to Florida State and Louisville, well, that means Pitt is going to beat North Carolina on Wednesday, and it means that Pitt's going to win on the road at Miami to end the regular season. Those are 2 big quad 1 wins. So there's give and take. I just think 7-2, 8-1 is a lock, but I think 7-2 is puts them in a very solid spot, regardless of what happens in the ACC tournament. Chris?
Yeah, I mean, 7. Like, here's my thing. If you're a 20-win team in the ACC, you should be making the tournament. I think that's just in my understanding of following college basketball. That should be that's usually enough, especially because you probably have amassed some good wins in the schedule, and Pitt has amassed some good wins. You talked about the quad 1 wins. They're 3-2 against quad 1 opponents. Yeah. John Rothstein's like top 45 that he released. They're 5-3 against those teams. So it's like they've put up some pretty good games this season. And had some pretty good wins, and they're not done. They get North Carolina this Wednesday, like you said. They get Miami again in the season closer. Now they need to not go into a slump against Louisville. They need to get back against Florida State. Though I do think people are starting to recognize that Florida State is better now that they're healthy again. But they can't afford to slip. Boston College, Virginia Tech, Georgia Tech, those type of games. But I think you're looking at a team that if I'd even say 21 wins before the tournament would be enough to say, like, all right, that team, even if they're like a really low seed, they should get in. But I also think Pitt fans should have confidence that they can go 7-2 down this stretch.
Right.
And there might be some trading of when those things happen, but this team's proven that it can fight in the clutch. I'm really intrigued to see how North Carolina plays because they've been very good since they lost to Pitt, and I bet you that they've been raring to get back at them. So we'll see how that goes out. But I mean, you get Louisville at home, you get your rematch with Florida State. The games I talked about earlier there, Syracuse at home. I think with the way you beat them on the road, I think at home is going to be very interesting there. Notre Dame, meh.
Mike Bray's last game.
Mike Bray's last game, he challenged Jeff Capel to a game of horse in South Bend. That's interesting to see if that'll play out or anything like that. But yeah, I think this is enough. And again, I think it's tough to discount the ACC tournament because with the way they played this year, I'd expect them to get a win or 2.
Yeah, I'll add this before we move on. The one thing missing from Pitt's resume is a big road win over an ACC opponent. Right now, their best road win on the ACC is against NC State. And while that's a quality win, NC State, despite being lower than Pitt in the ACC standings, seems to get more respect nationally than Pitt for whatever reason. And that 17-5. Yeah, I mean, Pitt's ahead of it in the ACC standings, and Pitt won head-to-head. So I don't know. I think that NC State also has probably the best player in the conference. That's another reason why it gets a lot of respect. But that's Pitt's best ACC win now. I think the Panthers have 2, if not 3, really challenging ACC road games in these final 9, with Wednesday at North Carolina. I think one that a lot of people are kind of overlooking right now is the road game at Virginia Tech, a place where Duke just lost last week.
True.
And that's a team that is desperately on the bubble. They're in like a Wake Forest type scenario where they were horrible in January, but they're clawing it out. They're clawing their way out of it now with that big win over Duke. So I think that's going to be a really tough place to play mid-February, and then ending the regular season against Miami on the road. If Pitt can win one of those 3 games, I think that's going to be another, especially either not Miami or North Carolina. That's going to be a huge boost to its tournament resume.
You bring a good point with the Hokies. Grant Basile, their forward, went ballistic in their last 2 wins over Duke and Syracuse. He's averaged 24.5 points. So I do think that they're not going to be easy. But the thing is it's like what I said. Like it's why they're not ranked right now. Like people were asking me. Like Joe Starkey had me on his show on 93.7 The Fan a couple weeks ago, and he said, "Chris, why aren't they ranked now?" And I said, "It's because they keep losing random games here and there." And then I said, if they beat Wake Forest, Florida State, and Miami, I think that they'd be ranked. They lost to Wake Forest, they lost to Florida State, excuse me, and they beat the other two, but that's not enough for voters and people to start putting them higher up in the rankings. I think Pitt needs to show that it can consistently beat those types of teams before it starts to get the recognition to push itself upwards. And being Virginia, avoiding a trap like Virginia Tech, I think is part of that equation.
Jack wants to know, why does Pitt get so little respect from KenPom and the net rankings? It seems like they hardly move up at all after a big win, but receive a notable drop after every loss. I'll start this one off, Jack. Here's why. It's because Pitt, right now, still has 7 losses. There's not one team, I think, in the AP poll this week that has 7 losses. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's how it's been all season long. Now, eventually, there will be a 7-loss team that's ranked. It's just we're not that far along in the season. Pitt played poorly in non-conference. Those losses against Vanderbilt and VCU and Michigan and even WVU, while that wasn't nearly the same Pitt team that we're seeing play now, that's what's hurting Pitt. Pitt's, Chris mentioned the Panthers are 3-2 against quad 1 opponents. That's great. They're 3-0 against ranked opponents. That's great. You know what kills them in their resume is the fact that they're 4-4 against quad 2 opponents. That means, the Panthers certainly know how to get up against a real good opponent, but when they're playing a team that they're probably better than, but a team that still has some talent, it's a coin flip. And those 4 losses in quad 2, I think, take away some legitimacy to what this group has achieved. And again, I will say it, a lot of those quad 2 losses came really early in the season when this team had yet to find its footing. So because of that, Pitt's still digging itself out of a hole that it placed itself in November. Carter, anything to add?
No, I think that's exactly where I'm at. Is that like when it comes to the net and the other thing and like KenPom things, I think the formulaic things are one thing. I think those things will over time. They Pitt just has to play through it and keep winning the games that they're supposed to. But like those early season losses, those things aren't forgotten by formulas. Like I think it's interesting with voters because a voter can decide, well, you know what? They weren't really, who they are now when they lost to that team. A voter can decide that and say, you know what? I'm putting them in there because this team that I'm seeing over the last month and a half here, that's the real Pitt team, and do that. Equations aren't going to get that done. I think that there's going to be things that when you have to take everything into account, they are there. And Pitt's dug themselves this hole, but I think that right now they've also dug themselves out of it as far as making it to being a relevant team that we are all talking about as a legitimate shot to make the NCAA tournament. Which, again, if I had told you that I said it on this show before Christmas. I was like, this team's going dancing, and Noah thought I was crazy.
I thought it was a bold take. I didn't think you're crazy. Continue.
Bold take or otherwise, I was saying I think this team can do that, and here they are doing it. And I'm not ragging on Noah for saying that because that was meant to be a bold take, but it was also like I think that this is actually one like I feel good about that. Like that's the when I'm on the second shot of a five par hole at a golf course, and I'm like, you know what, I'm gonna go for it. I'm trying to set myself up for the eagle. That's kind of where I was at with that one. So I think Pitt's they're going through these things now, but if they handle their business, all that will go away come early March.
How many eagles have you had in your golf career, Chris?
Like 12.
12? No, you have not. Get the hell out of here. You've not had 12 eagles. Mini golf. Yeah, I bet. I was going to say.
No, I've never played at a real golf course, man.
I was going to say, I mean, Look,
I was
man.
just like, I've hit several eagles and hole-in-ones
Right.
in my club, man. I'm a bad man.
I've known you for a while, and if you have 12 Eagles under your belt, that would have been a drastic surprise. On the note of the net rankings, there are some things, like I will say as we wrap up this point, that I don't get. Like, if you look at the net rankings right now, Virginia Tech, a team we just talked about, it's 13-8 overall. It's worse than Pitt in the conference standings. But it's 11 spots, ahead of Pitt in net rankings. It's at 51 right now, while Pitt's at 62. And you just look, quad 1, it's 2-4. Quad 2 is 3-3. Quad 3, it's 2-1. Quad 4, it's 6-0 compared to Pitt, who has a winning record in quad 1, is also 500 in quad 2, and is a combined 8-1 against 3-4, which is the same as Virginia Tech. So what makes the Hokies 11 spots better in that ranking system? I don't understand. But nonetheless, Pitt's still in a spot where if it continues to take care of business, it will be in the tournament. And I think that that's what fans need to worry about, not where it sits at Ken Palmer net. I get that can be nerve-wracking, but people select the at-large bids for this tournament. And if you look at the AP system, combine it with, wins and reputation and just being in the national conversation, I think the Panthers will be all right. We'll switch over to football for our final question, and I'll let Chris kick this one off. Randy wants to know, so Phil Dracovic on Wednesday said a lot to the media during his availability. And one of the first things he said was he encouraged WPIAL players to stay home and continue playing for Pitt. And Randy wants to know, was he being hypocritical saying that, considering that he not only chose Notre Dame out of high school, but he transferred out of Notre Dame to Boston College. So he comes back to Pitt as his third school in 5 years at the collegiate level. Does that make him a hypocrite? Chris, what do you say?
I don't think it does. And here's why. And I know some people are saying, what? I mean, he literally chose them twice, chose to go somewhere else twice. First of all, the second choice was when Kenny Pickett was the established starting quarterback for that program. And Phil Dracovic was not going to go somewhere and play second fiddle for 3 years behind them, because then we wouldn't know who he was. He wanted to prove he could be a starter, and he did that at Boston College. But it's important to remember, he committed in 2016 to Notre Dame. First of all, let's be real. Notre Dame is Notre Dame. Like, they're a supreme program. They're going to be there every year. And Pitt, even now, would have a hard time. They just lost Kenny Minchey.
They just lost another notable 4-star quarterback to Notre Dame.
And that's even with them winning 20 games in the last 2 years. But back in 2016, when all this was going down and Phil Dracovic was finishing up his high school career, Pitt was still not sure who they were. No one was sure who Pitt was. They had back-to-back in 2016. They finished their back-to-back 8-win seasons with Pat Narduzzi, but no one knew if this was long-term. After Dave Wanstead, you had Tom Graham, who bailed on Pitt after a season. You had Paul Christ, who was inspiring at times, but was 6-7, 7-6, and 6-7. Pitt wasn't for real, and he left after 3 years. So there was no guarantee that Pat Narduzzi was going to be the guy who was going to get Pitt to be ACC champions, to finish ranked in back-to-back seasons for the first time since like 1983. That was a different time. So Phil Dracovic and a lot of the WPIAL kids like Donovan McMillan and guys like that, even a couple of years ago, Pitt wasn't the presence that they are now. And I think that's kind of the point. And Phil Dracovic even said it later, where he was like, you know what, the way that they've been playing, the way they've been winning, and the fact that they had just a 9-win season with a great bowl win, and they're saying we needed to be better, that makes me want to play here. And I think it's different now that Pitt's an actual contender, and now Pitt can go, when they're going up again, when they make those top fives of all those different players, they have a lot more to their say to say, hey, you could play here and this can be you. And those players can be like, maybe I do want to play there. It's a different environment here. So yes, Phil Dracovic didn't pick Pitt before, but it wasn't the Pitt that it is now. And I think that now that Pitt is playing at a much higher level, he's saying now it's time for WPIAL kids to stay home.
I think that statement was perhaps taken out of context. Maybe not out of context, but just misinterpreted, where I think Phil was coming from the perspective of, take it from someone who's been
right
outside of the city. He went to one of the most prestigious college programs in the history of the sport.
Yep.
To play the most important. Everyone knows Notre Dame's quarterback. That's normally just how it is. If you're Notre Dame's quarterback, you're, for a large majority of college football fans, people will know Brady Quinn, Ian Book. You could go down the list. There's a million of them, right? And how can you not be swept away by that allure? And like you mentioned, Carter, Pitt was nowhere near the program it was when he was growing up. These kids who were Whippeal stars in high school not too long ago, they grew up seeing inconsistency at the head coaching spot when it came to winning games, when it came to really anything involved with Pitt football. So what reason did they have to be a fan, aside from if their parents went there or if they just grew up a Pitt fan because their family rooted for Pitt? If you didn't have that going for you, it would make no sense to be attracted to that program aside from the hometown thing. But if everyone else from your hometown is going to Penn State or somewhere in the SEC or Notre Dame, then why wouldn't you do the same? I think when Phil Dracovic said what he said Wednesday was saying, take it from someone who went to Notre Dame. Take it from someone who went elsewhere in the ACC. Take it from two guys who just spoke before me who went to the SEC and came back. Take it from someone like MJ Devonshire who went to the SEC and came back. You don't need to go play in the SEC or at Notre Dame or really anywhere else to achieve what you hope to achieve at the college level. Conference championships are going to be a big factor in getting into this extended playoff. Pitt has showed the ability to at least compete enough to get to the conference title game. So you will have an opportunity to play for a conference championship, which, if you can win that game, will get you in the conversation to make the playoff. You can do that at Pitt. Dracovic also pointed out Pitt's facilities, saying this place has great exercise equipment, great practice facilities. And he said, that's a knock. Other programs would say, you got to share a facility with the Steelers. They don't even have their own thing on campus, blah, blah, blah. But Phil said, no, these are, as a guy who's been at two other spots, he said, these are up to par. This is good enough. He was just telling kids, you don't, do what you want to do, but don't think that you can't achieve everything you hope to achieve in Oakland, because especially for, like we've said before, especially if you're a defensive back or a defensive lineman, you have everything you need to get to the next level, and you can also be competitive. Now, granted, there are certain things that Pitt still can provide. It's not consistently ranked. Even if it has been in the past 2 years, that's still a small sample size. It doesn't have the attendance or the home game atmosphere that SEC programs or Penn State or Notre Dame or other big powerhouses provide. They're certainly lacking in those areas. I think they're still behind in NIL compared to other major Power 5 programs. But overall, it's a much different thing than what they grew up watching. And I think that's what Phil was trying to say in his media availability last week.
I hear that. I think there's a lot of great perspective there too, talking about the ways that Pitt remains competitive. I also think that, a lot of people were upset that Pitt didn't haul in like a top 20 recruiting class after winning the ACC championship. 1 year doesn't do that, but consistent success does. And they're about to play a year where they're going to play Cincinnati, who's not as great. You get your rematch with West Virginia, but you get to play Notre Dame. You're going to get to play North Carolina. You're going to get to play Florida State. All teams that are going to get a lot of respect coming into this season. If they come in and have another big year where 9+ wins in this upcoming season, you're looking at, I think, a lot more people looking at that program a lot differently. And then you're saying we've got 3 straight years of 9+ wins and being a real threat. And of course, like you said, if they do things right, maybe they are maybe they do get to the ACC championship game, and maybe they're able to get to they're able to put themselves in the conversation for the extended football playoffs in a couple of years. Like this is a very real place, and if Pitt can do that, it's getting to there that allows you to springboard to being a team that has the hot year that makes the playoffs and becomes really strong. It takes time to get there. You don't just hit a home run overnight. Sometimes some programs do, but you probably also see those programs fizzle out a lot quicker. Pitt's trying to build something substantial. I think Pat Narduzzi and his staff, they're doing a heck of a job to get there right now.
All right, that's all we got from the questions today. Chris, any final thoughts as we wrap up another mailbag?
Just that I think it's going to be a really exciting time Pitt fans, again, don't take this stuff for granted right now. Enjoy this stuff. I think that they had their first sellout since 2019 when Zion Williamson and Jay-Z showed up to the Pitt in 2019. They had a huge sellout this weekend against Miami. Man, if you're a Pitt basketball fan, you got to get back to the Pitt soon, man. It was the Oakland Zoo. I got to shout out that group. I always grew up watching the Oakland Zoo on TV and seeing like how crazy they could get and thinking, oh man, that's cool. To see them losing it the way that they have and saying, and you hear the appreciation from Blake Hinson saying, hey, you guys are part of the team. I think that you are really seeing a resurgence of that excitement here. Pitt fans are showing up and delivering. So I think that Pitt fans, if you're hesitant to do so, go check it out. I think it's a heck of a show because I think if Pitt finishes strong this year and the recruits show up next year and they build the way we're talking about and they keep making progress, it's gonna be really hard to get a Pitt basketball ticket in the next few years because I think everyone's gonna want it. So take advantage of the chance now and get there.
And if you can't afford to get to the stadium, no worries. We have you covered. Head to our site at post-gazette.com for everything we write, some analysis, some features that you can check out about the Panthers, and hit that subscribe button to our YouTube channel if you haven't already, postgazettesportsnow.com. We'll have our weekly mailbag along with a whole bunch of other Pittsburgh sports related content on this channel that we bring to you every single day. That's all Chris has. That's all I have. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you liked the video, please like it and subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you enjoyed it on Apple Podcasts, please rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. For 6 months of digital access to post-gazette.com for just $6, click the link down in the description.